VA's program of comprehensive assistance to family caregivers. Congress required VA to establish support for caregivers after seeing the need for at-home assistance for Iraq and Afghanistan veterans coming home with serious injuries. The success and life-changing assistance it provided led Congress to remove the disparity between pre- and post-9/11 caregivers by expanding the program to veterans of all eras in the VA Mission Act. However, under the Trump administration, VA implemented new regulations narrowing eligibility much more than Congress ever intended to do. VA narrowed eligibility to veterans with a 70% or higher service-connected disability rating and those with an inability to perform an activity of daily living with assistance each and every time the activity occurs. That resulted in a mere 14% acceptance rate into the program, and thousands of legacy post-9/11 participants no longer qualify for the benefits they need, that they've earned, and that they deserve. Veterans in my state and every state represented on this committee received letters kicking them out of the program. I expressed this concern to the Trump administration and more recently to Secretary McDonough that too many veterans and caregivers would be left without the critical assistance they needed because of VA's overly restrictive regulations. And I pressed them to reconsider. Many of these folks up here join me in that effort. Today, I'm pleased that the Biden administration and Secretary McDonough have listened to the concerns raised by the people on this committee and to the veterans and caregivers across our great country. Just yesterday, VA announced that it will be taking steps to change the restrictive Trump regulations that have been harmful to so many veterans and their caregivers. VA will immediately halt the discharge of legacy participants from the program, meaning that no caregivers who are already in the program will be removed in October. VA will also reevaluate the program's eligibility requirements to ensure they meet the intent of Congress. I appreciate Secretary McDonough and Deputy Secretary Remy making this information public before the hearing so members of this committee could have the latest of information. We understand the VA witnesses here today will not be able to speak with great detail about some of these proposals, but I appreciate them being here to discuss the issue with this committee. Before we, and we'll hear from our second panel about their concerns with the program and how it is critically important to veterans and caregivers nationwide. I want to say a few things about our friend, Gary Augustine. I want to take a moment to recognize his life. A decorated veteran, a fierce advocate, and former executive director of the DAV who passed away last week. As a member of this committee for the last 15 years, I've had the honor of working closely with Gary on a host of issues critical to veterans and their families. One issue particularly close to his heart was the Caregivers Program that we're going to be talking about today. And he helped lead the fight to expand the program to veterans of all generations, including his fellow Vietnam veterans. As we work to improve this program, we also should do this with Gary in mind and do our best to honor his lifetime of service as a soldier, as a veteran, and as a leader in veterans advocacy community. His work for veterans and their families will certainly be felt for years to come, and he is somebody that I can tell you on a personal note, have missed since his retirement and continue to miss him. We'll give Senator Moran a minute or two, and then if he doesn't show, we'll go to the panel one. I will now turn it over to Senator Moran for his opening statement.
Chairman, thank you for your delay. When my former colleague, Senator Roberts, announced his retirement from the Senate, people started congratulating me on being the senior senator. And I didn't know what it meant.
It means you're a lot older.
That's not what I thought it meant. It meant I talk a lot more.
Okay.
And I got caught. Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I thank our witnesses for joining us today. This is a really important topic, and I'm glad we're having this hearing. The VA is expected to see a significant increase of veterans with long-term care needs within the near future. To prepare for this increasing trend, the Department has routinely told Congress and veterans that it is shifting the focus of its long-term care from institutional care settings to home and community-based settings. And I applaud the Department's efforts to empower veterans by supporting their desires to stay at home and to remain in their communities as long as possible, surrounded by family and loved ones. To that end, family caregivers play an integral role in making certain our veterans can remain at home and are central to the success of VA's efforts to shift care to home and community-based settings. It's important to make certain that these frontline heroes are adequately supported in their work caring for our nation's veterans. This week, I was pleased to introduce with Senator Hassan and Senator Tester of this committee the Elizabeth Dole Home and Community-Based Services for Veterans and Caregivers Act to expand home and community-based services for aging and homebound veterans. The Elizabeth Dole Act will empower veterans and caregivers by increasing the spending cap for alternative care programs and expanding access to alternative care programs to veterans living in U.S. territories and Native veterans enrolled in IHS or tribal health programs. As we work toward enabling veterans to delay the need for institutional care through legislation like the Elizabeth Dole Act, it is important that we don't lose sight of making certain related laws we previously enacted are implemented properly. In recognition of the vital work that caregivers perform, Congress expanded the program of comprehensive assistance for family caregivers in the VA Mission Act to make certain that family caregivers of veterans from any era receive the support and resources necessary to keep the veteran at home. The VA, however, is failing at implementing this expansion. From the 2-year initial delay in implementing phase 1 to the inexcusably high denial rates, we continue to hear from advocates and caregivers alike about the real fear of being unfairly denied or discharged from the program because of how the VA runs it. Today's hearing is both timely and necessary as we work to make certain the laws we pass are implemented in ways that work as Congress intended. We have a duty to see to it that the VA is faithfully executing these laws and investing resources as intended into family caregivers. Thank you again, and I look forward to today's testimony.
Thank you, Senator Moran. Now we'll start with the panelists on panel 1. I'd like to welcome Dr. Beth Taylor, who is the VA's Assistant Undersecretary for Health for Patient Care Services and the Chief Nursing Officer, to our first panel. You got a big job, Dr. Taylor. She is accompanied and supported by Dr. Colleen Richardson, Executive Director of the Caregivers Support Program. You too have a big job. I want to thank you both for being here. And Dr. Taylor, you may begin. We're going to give you 5 minutes. Hopefully you can keep it to that, but please know that your entire written statement will be a part of the record.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Tester, Ranking Member Moran, and members of the committee. I appreciate your interest in the VA Caregiver Support Program and the opportunity to answer your questions today. I am accompanied by Dr. Colleen Richardson, Executive Director of our Caregiver Support Program. The contributions of caregiving has an important impact in the lives of family members and an increasingly valuable role in our healthcare system today. Through our combined 37 years of VA clinical experience, Dr. Richardson and I have witnessed and recognized the impact of caregiving on the health and well-being of our veterans. The role of caregiving is not only time and energy intensive, it has an impact on one's physical, psychological, and financial health. The VA Caregiver Supports Program's mission is to provide resources, training, tools, and support services to the caregivers of our nation's veterans. The VA Caregiver Support Program is breaking new ground and setting the standard on caregiving in the healthcare industry. By being a trailblazer, the program is in a dynamic state of evolution. And to evolve, we must require a consistent feedback and partnership with all of you, our partners who are with us today, our veterans, our caregivers, and our many stakeholders that make our work possible. We are proud to be leading the country in providing a program which offers unmatched benefits, services, and support to caregivers of veterans to enable them to achieve their optimal level of independence and well-being. In 2010, the VA established the Caregiver Support Program to administer the Program of Comprehensive Assistance for Family Caregivers, PCAFC, and the Program of General Caregiver Support Services, PGCSS, two programs which support caregivers of veterans in need of personal care services. Initially, PCAFC was targeted towards caregivers of eligible veterans who incurred or aggravated a serious injury in the line of duty on or after September 11, 2001. Through the Mission Act of 2018, VA was authorized to expand eligibility to veterans who incurred or aggravated a serious injury or illness in the line of duty for all eras in a phased approach. Phase 1, which occurred October 1st of 2020, and Phase 2, which will go live this October 1st. The adoption of the new Mission Act regulations was to address issues in the lack of standardization, consistency, and equitability identified in PCAFC, while expanding the program and making it more inclusive for veterans and caregivers of all service areas. We have doubled the size of the program in the 16 months since expansion. Quite an accomplishment, and credit is due to our CSP staff who throughout the enterprise. Their work is particularly notable during the COVID era, where many clinicians also stepped forward to help with first and fourth mission assignments to ensure we could meet the care demands of our system and of our nation, and where the challenges of the new normal work environment required them to accomplish the expansion in new and untested ways. We recognize the hard work of our staff, yet we acknowledge there is so much more to be done. To be clear, we were not able to fully anticipate the challenges COVID would present, nor the impact the regulation would have on different eras of veterans. Through the evaluation of feedback from internal quality assessments, veterans, caregivers, and VSOs, along with other partners, we recognize the need to take a step back and assess. We have heard and understand the issues that have been raised about the rate of acceptance in PCAFC, as well as the concerns regarding our legacy participants in the eligibility criteria. The Caregiver Support Program has taken efforts to closely examine program data, and as we gain increasing granularity with our data systems, we can better identify and define trends that help us and others understand the true performance of the program. Now more than ever, veterans and caregivers have options available to appeal a PCAFC decision with which they disagree. A ruling by the U.S. Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims made available PCAFC decisions to be appealed to the Board of Veterans Appeals. The Caregiver Support Program is actively implementing the necessary infrastructure and processes to offer the full spectrum of options available under the Appeals Modernization Act, which includes supplemental claims, higher-level reviews, and appeals to the board. As a VA nurse, a daughter, granddaughter, and great-granddaughter of veterans, and in partnership with Dr. Richardson, a psychologist, a combat veteran, and a former member of the Navy Medical Service Corps, you have our commitment to guide the Caregiver Support Program to be the preeminent program in the industry on caregiving. We welcome and invite you, this committee, our partners, and our stakeholders to help us in achieving this mission. I thank you for the opportunity to discuss the accomplishments and opportunities of our program, and we stand ready to respond to your questions.
To the second, good job. I will tell you that I don't know who's going to show up for this hearing. This is a very, very busy time right now. Don't make an assessment because Senator Moran and I are the only ones at this committee. This is an important issue. This is a very important issue. And like I say, they may all show up, none may show up. Nonetheless, this is really important. I'm going to, and by the way, I'll just ask the questions. Whoever wants to answer them can answer them. But the truth is, I do look forward to working with you to develop new regulations to administer this program in a much more fair and much more efficient way. I understand VA will be changing the current regulations for Caregivers Program through its rulemaking process. So the question is, what's the process and timeline to get the proposed regulations so that we can get these restrictive criteria off the books?
Thank you, Chairman, for that question. I think most importantly, the process is going to involve our stakeholders. It's going to involve partnership with members of this committee. It's going to involve our veterans and our caregivers. We need to look at the process holistically, and we need to anticipate what the impact of any changes in eligibility might be, especially as we have learned in the phase 1 rollout that different areas of veterans have different needs. So we must not only think about the veterans that we're serving now, but we must anticipate our phase 2 expansion and anticipate what needs that cohort of veterans may have that we haven't seen yet to date. So in terms of the timeline, sir, we don't have that established, but I can tell you that tomorrow at 0800, Dr. Richardson and myself have a meeting with the acting undersecretary, and we will be initiating our efforts relative to the announcements that the deputy secretary had in the press conference yesterday.
Okay, very, very good. I think that it's going to be critically important that as you go through that process and announce that timeline that you set up, that as you said in the process, the VSOs need to know where you're at so that they know what to do within that timeline. The number of post 9/11 veterans who were poised to be dropped from this program in October, not to mention all the veterans denied entry into the program in the first place, is concerning to all of us. For those notified that they would be removed from the program in October, is there anything that they need to do now?
No, sir. There will be additional communications coming out to the veterans and caregivers, notifying them of the announcement yesterday and the impact that will have. I am sure that our veterans and caregivers have many questions related to the announcement yesterday, and those details will be coming out imminently.
For those that were denied access to the program under the current regulations, will they need to apply again?
Dr. Richardson, can you take that one, please?
Sure. Good afternoon, Mr. Tester. So to answer that question, sir, I think there's still more to come on that. We haven't figured out exactly the path that we want to go given yesterday's announcement, but rest assured that between Dr. Taylor and myself, we'll make sure that it's equitable and fair to all veterans as we move forward in this process. So more to come, sir.
I appreciate that. Look, I think that making it as user-friendly as possible for the veterans is really important, especially as to what's happened now. So communication is going to be very, very important directly with the veterans, with the VSOs, so they can help you with communication is really important. Now, look, I've heard from caregivers around the country that the consistent reassessments of veterans and their caregivers take a mental and physical toll. And by the way, I would agree with that as you take a look at the challenges these folks have. Will these assessments continue even as the VA works to improve this program?
Yes, sir. Our current plan is for those assessments to continue, and really for a couple reasons. One, we want to have a complete data set on the needs of our veterans and in the different cohorts. And so we feel it's important to continue those assessments. However, we also feel it's important to be clear about the actions that we will not be taking as a result of those assessments as we have in the past. And I think we want to ensure that we're very clear about our communications with those caregivers and families. We know historically that we haven't done the best job in communicating. I think Dr. Richardson would agree. And we want to be very clear about our communications and what the purpose of the reassessments are and how we might use that information to better the program going forward.
Yeah, look, in the end, you guys have to make this program work, and I don't work in the agency, but it seems to me if the VA is reevaluating criteria right now, I would just say make sure the evaluations you're doing are going to actually do you some good in the end with the criteria changing. And then the other question is how does the program support mental health needs of caregivers? Or does it?
Yes, an excellent question, sir, and one that we're particularly concerned about as recognizing that there is, as you just said, stressors associated with the assessments, the potential denials of the program, and so we're very cognizant of that. We want to make sure that our caregivers and our veterans have the support services that they need, and we partner very closely with the Office of Mental Health Services to ensure that we have wraparound support for our veterans who may need mental health support.
Thank you. Senator Moran.
Chairman, thank you. Again, thank you both for being here. It's a little bit more of a difficult hearing, maybe for you and us, with the announcement from yesterday.
Yes, sir.
And it's, I mean, I think the correct answer will often be we don't yet know. But what do you expect, or what do you think the changes in regulations will accomplish? And maybe your answer is that that's going to be determined by all those consultations that we think you should make. But what's the problem that's being solved? That's being attempted to be solved?
Yes, excellent question, Senator. Thank you. I think what we do know by the experience with the Phase 1 expansion is, as I said a few minutes ago, that different eras of veterans have different needs. We've also found that some veterans, while they need support services, may need them intermittently and not as narrowly as was originally described in the regulation. So, for example, there may be a veteran that is receiving radiology or oncologic chemotherapy procedures and may have periods of time where they need a caregiver over a long period while they're in that, wherever they're receiving that treatment. Or there may be a veteran who has had a very significant surgery and for, a period of time, they may need caregiver support, but it is not indefinite. It is not for their lifetime. So I think those are two examples that give us an opportunity to reflect on what we have written in our regulations and what clarifications or what minor shifts we might be able to make to capture men and women like I just described and others who may have intermittent or periodic needs.
I wasn't sure when you answered Senator Tester's question about time frame. So is the department proposing new regulations that will be written and then submitting them for comment or commentary by the groups that you described?
Yes,
or
sir.
that as compared to getting the input first and then drafting the regulations? The regulations will be something we can see soon?
We're certainly hoping that. I think we are planning a summit in the month of April, so coming up obviously very soon, and we really want to get input. You know, our thought is we will need that help in co-creating the way forward and ensuring that we have it right. Because we recognize that, as the Chairman suggested, that the original intent, the first regulation, we missed the mark on that. And so we want to get it right, but we also recognize that we can only do that through partnerships with our VSOs, our stakeholders.
So regulations drafted and then submitted for commentary.
Yes, sir.
And at what point in time did you realize the mark had been missed?
I think as we gathered data, especially with the expansion of caregiver support, with the Phase 1 expansion, I think as we got additional information about what that particular era of veterans needed, and also thinking that the experience with legacy and applying the new criteria against men and women who had been in this program for many years, that's how we came to the conclusion internally that we have missed the mark.
Waiting to ask a question?
No. Okay. No, this is all in person.
Okay. Dr. Richardson, the centralized teams, team reviews, and in the final eligibility determination for all legacy participant reassessments, I want to spend a minute on that. These teams make the determination based on an assessment done by the local VA medical center and through telehealth visits. Have I got that right?
Yes, sir, that is accurate.
That's my premise, and my question is, does the VA think that this centralized process ensures consistent, appropriate application of the eligibility criteria, including mental health determinations?
Sir, that's an excellent question. I think we had the opportunity to remove decision-making from the medical facilities. There's over 140 medical facilities, so that's at least 140 different decisions. So we have these specialized, centralized eligibility and appeals team, which are specifically trained to look at the assessments that the medical facility staff have completed, and objectively as a team look at the holistic picture of the veteran and render a decision based on those assessments. We feel like having it removed from the medical facilities offers a more objective perspective on the chart. As far as consistency goes, we are seeing consistency amongst decision-making within the seat teams. However, I think, as Dr. Taylor has alluded to, we are seeing some gaps with the ability to expand regulations further to capture more veterans as we move forward. But as far as consistency in decision-making, we are seeing that across the teams.
So the results to date would be different from, broadly different from one hospital to another?
They shouldn't be, sir.
But they are?
So we've done consistency and standardization exercises, and we are only seeing that there are about 3 facilities or 3 visits.
3 outliers?
3 outliers, yes, sir.
Any of them in Kansas?
No, sir.
And of course, an outlier could be, in my mind, a good thing or a bad thing. I don't know which way that cuts. How is information from the VA provider or other providers taken into account during the reassessment process? And most importantly, well, equal importance is, and mental health providers in particular, was their commentary, their notes, their description of their patient, how was it considered?
Great question, sir. So it is taken into consideration. I do think that's another opportunity for training and education and another opportunity to partner with our primary care physicians. We have heard concerns about that as well, that those things are not being taken into consideration. So I think that's another opportunity to expand upon and do better on.
Let me conclude with a kind of a series of questions. What percentage of the decisions were overturned through the appeals process?
Great question, sir. It's 13%.
And what's at least an estimate of how long the process takes through the VHA clinical appeals process, through the Board of Veterans Appeals for supplemental claims and higher level reviews? What's the extent of all that?
So the median days for decision within VHA, the VHA clinical appeals process, is around 17 days for a decision. It's yet to be determined what that will be with the board as we continue to work through those processes.
What resources is the VA dedicated to processing the appeals that have been generated by the legacy participant reassessment process and the program expansion?
Sure. So we have dedicated resources already getting ready to hire for Phase 2 expansion. We're getting ready to hire an additional 362 staff. We have 80% of that hired to date. So we have roughly about 2,200 staff within the Caregiver Support Program across the country. 80% of that is currently hired. In regards to the appeals, to the Board of Veterans Appeals, we have staff detailed into the program office with an org chart of an additional 70-plus staff getting ready to come on board as well.
It's quite a team.
Yes, sir.
While Senator Tester sneezes, I'll ask one more question. What VA resources have been dedicated to making certain that they are appropriately adjudicated? So in addition to personnel, any other thing that I should know about what the VA is doing to make certain they get it right?
It's a great question, sir. So we are working closely with the VBA and BVA as we move forward. VBA has the expertise in this area, so we're leveraging some of their automated processing, and they're teaching and educating us along the way. And it's been a process, and we're thankful for their partnership as we move forward.
Thank you both.
Yeah, thank you very much, Senator Moran, and I want to thank you also both for your testimony today and the answers to the questions. Very concise, and I appreciate that very much. And we'll release you. You're welcome to stay and hear the second panel if you'd like, and we'll go to our second panel. So, and I'll introduce the second panel as we're getting set up. We have multiple veteran service and advocacy organizations who represent and assist veterans and caregivers across our country. Our second panel will include Steve Schwab, who is Chief Executive Officer of the Elizabeth Dole Foundation, Kara Benson, a caregiver for a husband who is a post-9/11 Army veteran. We have Jim Marsalek, the National Service Director for the Disabled American Veterans, Andrea Sawyer, Advocacy Navigator for the Quality of Life Foundation, and even though this is not a virtual hearing for the members, it is a virtual hearing for one of our folks that are testifying. This is Sarah Verardo, Chief Executive Officer of the Independence Fund, and as I said, she'll be joining us virtually. Steve, Mr. Schwab, we will start with your opening statement.
Thanks so much, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Tester, Ranking Member Moran, and members of the committee, The Elizabeth Dole Foundation is pleased to testify today on the VA's program of comprehensive assistance for family caregivers. We are also deeply appreciative to you, Senator Moran, Chairman Tester, and others who've offered bipartisan support to the Elizabeth Dole Foundation Act. As you might suspect, I had a very different testimony planned until yesterday's announcement from the VA. But I'm very pleased to be with the committee today to ensure that we do right by our veterans and their caregivers. The Dole Foundation applauds Secretary McDonough and Deputy Secretary Remy and the program staff for announcing a reversal of all legacy caregiver dismissals and for planning to reevaluate the program. This was a vitally important decision, and we thank VA leadership for listening to our community and taking this very necessary step. As a result, we now need to shift our focus to building new, inclusive, and realistic eligibility formula and regulations and a customer service-focused evaluation process. Yesterday's decision proves that the voices of our MSOs and VSOs and our caregivers and veterans are vital in shaping the destiny of VA's support for our community, but there is still more that needs to be done. While we're looking forward to engaging in a process to formulate new regulations, there is one aspect I want to ensure is discussed today, and I believe you both referenced this: the outsized emphasis on the activities of daily living, which stacks the deck against those caring for veterans with a TBI or PTSD. Many of these veterans require 24-hour care due to violent flashbacks, mood swings, confusion, and the inability to use their phone or even to prepare a meal. However, because they are capable of performing ADLs, they were less likely to be eligible for PCFC under the previous regulations. We must ensure this inequity, among others, is addressed in the new regulations. Recognizing that my time is limited, I'm honored to turn it over to one of our caregiver fellows, Kara Benson, whose story illustrates why yesterday's announcement was so important and the path forward to getting this right is so vital. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Steve. Chairman Tester, Ranking Member Moran, and members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to share my story. I'm a full-time caregiver to my husband, Eric, an Army combat veteran who lives with traumatic brain injury, chronic pain, and a degenerative neurological condition. I've been a wife, staring at their comatose spouse, being told it's time to say goodbye, only to feel relief when he defied all expectations. Today, Eric is considered permanently and totally disabled and unable to work. He is wheelchair dependent, struggles cognitively, suffers migraines and blackouts, and is losing his vision. He's 41. Congress created the program of comprehensive assistance for family caregivers to assist caregivers like me whose spouses need substantial care. The program should have been a blessing. However, the program has become unpredictable, stressful, and frankly dehumanizing. My husband grows more dependent on my care every day. Yet, I was accepted to the Caregiver Program in 2017, dropped in 2018, denied in 2019, and readmitted in 2020, but only after 2 hard-fought appeals. The assessments are demoralizing. My husband is only capable of 30 minutes of sustained cognitive activity. I had to watch him answer questions until he was doubled over and drooling on himself in exhaustion because the assessor would not allow me to help him respond. There is no reason to ignore medical accommodations and cause medical distress to prove what was already well documented. Despite all of Eric's care needs, we were only approved for level 1. His need for supervision, protection, and instruction, even though clearly documented in both his assessment and medical records, was never even taken into consideration by the seat. Before I was a caregiver, I was a nonprofit executive and a college professor. We are a one-income household, not by choice, but by forced circumstance. The cost of caregiving is crushing, and my family should not have to fear that an annual assessment or a policy change will threaten our financial stability. To the members of this committee, please know that I speak for every caregiver when I say our ability to provide holistic care for our veterans is hampered by frequent and intrusive assessments which are not properly reflective of clinical records are weighed accurately in seat decisions. Congress must ensure that any new regulations require a veteran's needs to be documented accurately, evaluated thoroughly, so that our nation can better serve our veterans and their caregivers. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Chairman Tester, Ranking Member Moran, thank you for inviting DEV to testify on ways to fix and strengthen VA's comprehensive caregiver program. Mr. Chairman, 6 years ago, DAV launched the Unsung Heroes Initiative to honor family caregivers, to extend the program to veterans of all eras, and to include veterans disabled due to illnesses, not just injuries. In 2018, we were pleased when Congress passed the VA Mission Act, which expanded the Caregiver Program to veterans of all eras. And in 2020, we applauded when VA adopted new rules that extended eligibility to cover illnesses. These new regulations also attempted to fix longstanding problems with eligibility, reassessments, and appeals. Unfortunately, almost 2 years later, it's clear many of the same problems remain. For example, the regulations change how VA measures a veteran's need for assistance with activities of daily living, or ADLs. According to VA's new definition, a veteran must require help each time they complete an ADL. Under this standard, a paralyzed veteran who finds the strength to transfer from their wheelchair just one time in a day would not meet this each time standard for mobility. What's worse, VA does not even explain how they determine an ADL meets the each time standard. Mr. Chairman, it's become clear that these new regulations are not working as the law intended. Let me share a story of a veteran and caregiver that illustrates problems with the current regulations. In 1969, Dennis Joyner was gravely wounded in Vietnam by a landmine, resulting in the amputation of both his legs and his left arm. He spent months recovering in hospitals and years rebuilding his life. But Dennis was blessed to marry Donna, who gave up her career and became his full-time caregiver. When the program was expanded to include Vietnam veterans, they were thrilled to be approved at the highest level of support. But just 1 year later, VA conducted a reassessment and notified them that their caregiver benefits would be reduced. They, and we, cannot understand how VA could find that Dennis needed less caregiver support since his injuries have not and will never improve. And the only change was they are both a year older. Mr. Chairman, VA's Caregiver Program was created precisely for people like Dennis and Donna. We were pleased to hear VA yesterday announce a plan to review and change the regulations and to protect caregiver benefits during the process. But unless VA prioritizes getting veterans and caregivers into the program and not out of it, the problems will persist. Here's a few of DAV's recommendations. First, VA must replace the current eligibility regulations, particularly the each time ADL rule, and create new standards that are clear, consistent, and equitable. Second, VA must provide detailed explanations on how standards will be measured and applied in each decision notification is sent to veterans and caregivers. Third, eligibility decisions for veterans should be shifted to VBA, allowing VHA to focus on qualifying, training, and supporting family caregivers. VBA already has the experience and infrastructure necessary to process these claims. Fourth, VA should only require annual reassessments when a veteran's disabilities and need for caregiver services are likely to have changed. A 70-year-old veteran who is paralyzed or missing multiple limbs is extremely unlikely to need less caregiver support 1 year later. Finally, the administration should withdraw its appeal in the Baudette case that provided veterans the right to appeal caregiver decisions to the board. Veterans must have all of their due process rights protected, including full appeal rights. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my statement. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Jim, and I appreciate your recommendations. Andrea?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for holding this hearing. I work for the quality of life information. Was created to serve the families of the seriously wounded veterans. We've created educational resources and are one of the few organizations that assist with clinical appeals, one of which was the Benson's Appeal. Over the years, legislation and policy surrounding caregivers has evolved. Congress passed the VA Mission Act, which expanded eligibility to the program. By broadening eligibility, Congress acknowledged caregiver involvement led to improved outcomes. Congress included traumatic brain injury, psychological trauma, and other mental disorders and identified seriously injured as the level of severity to be considered. As a result of the new legislation, the VA drafted new regulations. We have found that while the legislation created a program for seriously injured, VA has created a program for the catastrophically injured. Under the new regulation, a veteran must now require assistance with an ADL each and every time it is completed. Under the new supervision standard, the veteran must need continuous daily care. Quality of Life has requested information on the decision-making process, SOPs, and training documents to inform our efforts, but we have been denied access to that information. We would like to applaud the VA for taking steps to pause the dropping of caregivers to review the process. Now, it is even more relevant to highlight the challenges faced by families as they navigate the PCAFC. We have noticed the following issues. Number one, information that should be correct in the VA medical records is not. Ratings information, documentation of guardianships, and fiduciaries are wrong. These document an already established need for assistance or supervision. Number two, the collaboration with the veteran's primary care manager is rarely filled out by the veteran's doctor, and that information is limited to very generic information and only includes the last 12 months of records. The program is supposed to gather outside medical records. This rarely happens. We do not have any idea if the new assessment has been validated against other industry standard validated instruments or how it's scored to make decisions on whether a veteran qualifies for a caregiver. And lastly, during the assessment process, the veteran must list his deficits, and then the caregiver must describe all assistance provided in front of the veteran repeatedly, taking an emotional and mental health toll. There is a large denial rate for applicants. Legacy review denials are high. Given the information presented above, we respectfully ask the committee to work with the VA and nonprofit organizations on the following items and additional items in our testimony. To realign the program with congressional intent. To increase transparency related to the decision-making process. VA needs to make the full criteria available. To change the requirements so a veteran does not have to be present for the caregiver's interview and lengthen the time frame for check-ins and reassessments to lessen the burden on caregivers and veterans. And to require the VA to honor its duty to assist to veterans to help collect their records. We would like to thank the Secretary for preemptively granting our request to place a moratorium on drops and reassessments, which was our number one ask. To leave you with an appeal from a caregiver on her thoughts about this program, one caregiver stated, "We have spent the last 15 years focusing on every improvement our son has made. The PCAFC reassessment process wiped that out. I had to recount everything he could not do in front of him. My son, who was a nuclear engineer, now struggles to put Legos together. He wept during the assessment. I asked if he could leave and was told no. As the mother, it broke my heart. When he starts to recover mentally, we have to go through it all again for the quarterly assessment. And we have similar letters to offer for the record. Mr. Chairman, the Quality of Life Foundation thanks you for holding this hearing, and we look forward to answering any questions you may have."
I better speak into the mic. Next, virtually, we have Sarah Verardo.
Chairman Tester, Senator Moran, thank you for inviting me today to testify in front of you. I hope you and your staff have had the opportunity to review my written testimony submitted on Monday. And I hope you see that our organization, along with many other organizations, has made every effort possible to warn the VA that this new regulation does not honor the commitment Congress set with veterans and caregivers through the Mission Act, is a dramatic step back in the support it provides disabled veterans and the caregivers who support them, and places every veteran and the caregivers in support that are supporting them in real danger of falling through the cracks of what has turned into a senseless, compassionless, bureaucratic nightmare. I am a caregiver myself to my catastrophically wounded husband, Sergeant Michael Verardo, U.S. Army retired. Michael was twice wounded in Afghanistan in 2010, imminent death status, his arm and leg blown off, and 120 surgeries later. As his recent annual reassessment for the Caregiver Program noted, Mike requires constant assistance to complete the basic activities of daily living and needs my constant support to navigate life and society. But just last week, we were notified that Mike will be demoted to the lowest tier in the new caregiver ratings. Why? Apparently because someone on the Centralized Evaluation and Assessment Team, the SEAT, saw videos from 2016 and 2017 where Mike was advocating for reform in VA healthcare programs. Well, I was with him at every one of those events to provide the assistance he needed even then. Those 5 and 6-year-old videos were apparently enough to determine Mike didn't need as much support anymore. The rest of his assessment explicitly said otherwise, and his VA records note that the declines have been devastating and he requires the equivalent of full-time nursing home care. But this one statement about an internet search, which, by the way, is nowhere in the regulation, was enough to reduce Mike's rating. When did Google become a clinical evaluation tool? How is this even allowable, ethical, or legal? And most importantly, senators, what are you going to do about it? What's even more incredible is that I'm relatively one of the lucky ones, if you can call it that. Over the last 5.5 months, we've been inundated with pleas of veterans and caregivers being told they will be disenrolled come October 1st, 2022. After years of being at the highest tier ratings in the prior Caregiver program, now these catastrophically disabled veterans, many of whose cases I've detailed in my written testimony, are being told they are somehow miraculously cured, can complete their activities of daily living or ADLs, and no longer need any supervision. The assessment documents in these cases detail how these veterans fail their ADLs and need supervision for their own safety. But because the regulation requires these assessment teams to make the impossible prediction the veteran will require continuous, moderate to significant levels of personal care services for the next 6 months, the assessment teams realize they can't, that likely no one can, so they say the veteran must be disenrolled. And the Independence Fund and many of the other organizations who have joined in on this crusade have warned the VA, Congress, and even this committee that exactly this would happen. We made these warnings during the lead up to the new regulation, during the public comment period on that regulation, in our letter to the committee in 2020, in my comments before the Caregiver Advisory Committee in 2021, and in a letter that we and 21 other organizations sent to the Secretary last November. We've detailed in the written testimony how each element of the new regulation was unnecessary and counterproductive. But the real tragedy is that it was unnecessary. By the law you passed, VA could have simply certified the caregiver IT tracking system and used the old regulation. But as you said, Chairman Tester, it appears the VA took the opportunity of the congressionally mandated expansion of the Caregiver Program to pre-9/11 veterans to also make it tougher to get into the program. We are cautiously optimistic with VA's announcement yesterday regarding the suspension of disenrollments and demotions for legacy caregivers. But senators, this is the 3rd time since 2017 the VA has been forced to pause these actions because of the systemic lack of consistency in these evaluations. This time, it's because the regulation is so poorly written. And we will fully engage in the stakeholder summits we hope that VA holds as soon as possible. We will support such changes like the one we recommended in our petition for rulemaking and letters, and we ask Congress to make the necessary legislative changes. But senators, we've been down this road before, and it has failed before. Bureaucratic delays to protect the systems and processes has consistently proven stronger than the desire to help veterans and caregivers. So senators, we ask you, if we are not all here together by the end of April or May at the very latest, then we ask you to please take action to fix this legislatively. Thousands of caregivers across this country are counting on you. We've stepped up to take on the unimaginable. We fought longer and harder than any one person is meant to fight, and we live lives without margin while fighting against the very institution and the very program meant to help us all while navigating heartbreaking declines and loss in our own homes. So we're counting on you, and we need your help. Thank you.
Sarah, thank you for your testimony. I want to thank everybody for their testimony, and please know that I don't think there's anybody on this committee that's happy with what's happened. I remember talking to Assistant Secretary Remy while he was being confirmed and said, we've got I believe, an 86% denial rate in this program. I don't think that's what Congress intended. And then when I hear the stories of assessment and reassessment, it's something that makes you wonder why. That's all, just why. And I'm going to focus most of my questions with you, Kira. I could focus it with anybody who testified today, but I think you've talked about the fact that your husband is a triple amputee, correct?
No, my husband has all his limbs.
He has what?
He has all his limbs.
Has all his limbs, and so the injury that he has is with TBI and PTSD?
No, he has a TBI, and the TBI was significant enough that he has toxic encephalopathy as well. So his brain, for lack of a better term, is dying.
Gotcha. And so when you first got accepted into the program, and then you were reevaluated, did the person who did the assessment, as was pointed out, I think, by Jim, that you know, is a year older, did they give you any reason why?
No. So our first entry into the program was 17. We were dropped in 18 because we wintered in the South, and they considered us non-permanent address. By 19, we had one.
So stop for a second.
Yes,
You were dropped from the program because you had a different address in the winter than you did in the summer?
correct.
I assume that must be part of the regs? I mean,
No,
you lived in this country, right?
correct.
You fought for this country, right?
He did.
That's an interesting twist. Keep going.
So in 19, we applied again, but because we had finally won a correct diagnosis of traumatic brain injury, my husband was injured in 2000, 2003. He was not diagnosed with TBI and encephalopathy until 2018. Because he had that on board, we were considered ineligible for the program because it wasn't service-connected. And the filing in VBA to get that service-connected has been active since 2016. When the regulations changed in 2020, it no longer had to be service-connected, and we were ecstatic. My husband was home-based primary care at that point. They encouraged us to apply yet again, and we did. We were accepted in at level 1. At that point in time, he had one ADL, and he was given intermittent supervision, protection, and instruction. We reassessed in 2020, January of this year. He had just been released from the hospital for COVID. He had 5 ADLs that were hands-on and needed continuous daily care, as is evidenced by 3 doctors saying he could not be left alone. We still attained level 1. The VA only counted, or the seat, I should say, counted 2 of the ADLs because the other 3 ADLs, even though he needed anywhere from 25 to 75% help during those ADLs, were not entirely dependent. We were told in order for an ADL to count, it had to be 100% caregiver effort. They did not include supervision, protection, and instruction, even though 3 of his doctors had asked us never to leave him alone, and we were issued level 1. We decided not to appeal at that point. We were exhausted.
I've got you. Just curious, did the TBI happen in service to the country?
It did.
Was he in theater?
He was in, his first TBI was a parachute malfunction during basic airborne course. His second was a double car bomb in Bakuba.
And did the Department of Defense, did they diagnose him as having traumatic brain injury?
No, he was never screened under the DOD. The VA diagnosed him.
Okay. I'll kick it over to you, Senator Moran.
And I don't know how to respond. I mean, I appreciate your circumstance, the stories that you tell. I don't know how you are capable of doing what you're doing, and I don't understand why the process that's designed to help you ends up harming you. And I apologize for that, and we continue to work to try to take care of veterans in the process, make the VA perform its duties as it should. And it's true for all of our witnesses and advocates here today. Thank you for what you do to care for those who've been harmed so greatly. I don't know who to ask this question to, but how do you explain what Kara just described? Steve, I mean, you brought Kara to us. Obviously, Kara has the capability of telling a story that's so compelling, and it sounds like there's just so many other circumstances in which there's a compelling reason to get this right. Why did it go so wrong? What went on that precipitates this kind of circumstance?
Well, Senator Moran, thanks for that question. And you can see why we wanted to bring Kara here to bear witness to what she's been going through. Andrea mentioned that she's got letters from countless other caregivers who've experienced similar circumstances. You heard compellingly from Sarah what she and Michael have faced in their own situation. And unfortunately, that's happening too much and too often. And Senator Tester, I believe you asked a really important question to the VA earlier around consistency. I think it was you that asked that question. And it was suggested, and perhaps it's true, that the VA said that there are 3 hospitals that they deem outside of the consistency that they've seen across other institutions in executing evaluations. We have not seen that. The inconsistency on the experience that Caregivers has faced across the country is unbelievable. And going into these evaluations, it seems that the standard all too often is how do we get to no versus how do we get to yes? And if we can't get to yes, or we've got to get somewhere in the middle, there's not a clear path given to that caregiver and that veteran. There's not a warm handoff. And I don't want to say that happens in every situation. There's certainly great people at the VA at every level doing good work. But there's far too many stories like Kara's and Sarah's and Andrea's that are happening, and that points to some real root issues. And we think it's because there's 160 facilities that are executing this program in different ways. As hard as, and Colleen has been a great new leader for the program, but as hard as we put forward new issues around consistency, it doesn't seem to be changing what we've been experiencing.
Mr. Schwab, that suggests that, in a sense, that it's luck of the draw or where you live, just circumstances, not that the program may be fine, but it's implemented differently in different places.
That's correct.
So some people have an appropriate response, and others have a tragic response.
That's correct.
What was announced yesterday by the Deputy Secretary, I think that as I looked at what was said, it's enacting a moratorium on discharging legacy participants from the program, reviewing eligibility requirements to ensure they meet congressional intent, and explore shifting some responsibility to VBA. What could you each, or any of you who feel that this is a question that you could answer well, tell me what you think this means for veterans and caregivers? Did you hear what you wanted to hear, even though it's now not in the beginning? Jim, you looked like you were ready to speak.
Sure. Thank you, Senator. I am optimistic. I am glad to hear, and I was glad to hear VA say that there's going to be a summit in April, because that's news to me, but I think that's what needs to happen. You get people together to talk about these different issues, and I was glad to hear they're working with VBA already, because they've been through these processes before. The transparency is the biggest issue here. Every caregiver we've talked to, and I'm sure everybody at the table can attest that, you're not getting any information as to how they made their decision. They're not sharing any of it. We don't know how they've made the decision, how they've come to the conclusion. The case I talked about Denny, he got a year older. Nothing has changed. His level of caregiver support that his wife provided has never changed at all in the past year. But although he was reduced and not told why, the letter just said you're being reduced to the lower level effective this day. That's all the letter says. So I think you have to go back to the drawing board and figure out what should the regulations be. But I think you have to do it with everybody. And I'll refer back to the appeals modernization. That took everybody in a room months to figure out a good appeal process for VBA. We're in the same situation right here. We've tried. The process is broken. It's not working. It's not how anybody intended it to be. So we got to go back to the drawing board and figure out how do we do this together. And you got to have everybody at the table. And I think caregiver families at the table talking about what they're experiencing is very, very important. The reassessments, going through those so frequently, and requiring the veteran to be part of some of these quarterly calls as well, is damaging to the veteran. It's doing more harm than good. Yeah. I mean, we're hearing that across the board.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I'd like to say I am optimistic that the VA is willing to look at this regulation and assessment. One of the things, or several of the things that we have found to as we're reviewing the clinical decisions that we can find in the record, is that there are issues surrounding the fact that outside medical records are very often not included. They're not given time to gather outside medical records and have them included. In a lot of cases, and the Benson's case was one, from the time she was notified that she was being reassessed till the time she had a seat decision was like 3 weeks. So she didn't have time to gather a lot of the outside medical records. And then there's a whole process to get the records scanned into the VA, and a decision had already been made. In addition, the PCM is not asked very specific questions. They're basically asked, does the veteran understand the treatment plan? Does the caregiver understand the treatment plan? Can the care be provided in the home? And has the veteran ever been considered for institutionalization? Well, why not ask them whether or not the veteran can perform the ADLs, or whether or not they can meet the standard, whether or not they think the veteran is able to meet the standards for supervision, protection, and instruction, rather than relying on a self-report from the veteran and caregiver that then they can disregard as a self-report. And the third thing in that decision is that there is a question that SEAT considers, with the decision-making body considers, that is worded in a very strange way. The question is the individual unable to self-sustain in the community? And the answer to that single question determines whether or not a veteran is tiered at a Tier 1 or a Tier 2. The question itself is worded in a backwards manner. So if you answer, is the individual unable to self-sustain in the community, and you say no, that means the veteran is able to self-sustain in the community. If they would simply change the question, is the individual able to self-sustain in the community, that would overturn about 75% of the tiering errors between level 1 and level 2 that we see. So, thank you.
Great point.
Thank you, Ms. Sawyer.
No, we're good. Senator Murray.
Well, thank you so much to all of you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for continuing to stay on this. And I certainly think when we first passed this, as Senator Tester and others know who worked on this, we never expected these kinds of challenges this far into this. I'm glad the VA made some announcements yesterday. We're going to be following up on this. Your testimony today is extremely important. And I know I'm not going to give up, and I know Senator Tester's not going to give up, Senator Brown, Senator Moran. We want this to work. I didn't see you over there. I don't know anybody that wants this program to work like this. I think we are in this, and we want you to know that, and we're going to continue to work to make sure that this program is instituted the way we envisioned it when we first passed it. So thank you all very much for being here, and appreciate the responses so far. I do want to ask Ms. Sawyer a question a little bit differently, and it's great to see you again. Thank you for your steadfast leadership advocating for veterans and their caregivers. As you know, we made changes in the last caregiver bill to make VA better account for the invisible wounds of war for which a veteran may need a caregiver. Tell me, has the VA done a better job with invisible wounds, and what would you like to see them do as part of this new look at regulations?
So I do believe they've expanded the areas of criteria that they look for in adding self-protection, self-direction, self-neglect, safety inside and outside the home, delusions, hallucinations. Unfortunately, and I think some of this has to do with COVID, but I also, and how they've changed things with COVID. Unfortunately, it becomes a self-report. They ask the veterans and caregivers about these things themselves. They don't ask for the input of any specialist. The input of any specialist is not required. Only 5 questions from the PCM, those very generic questions that I listed, which don't really get to the heart of the matter and whether or not anyone feels that this veteran has a mental health need or a psychological need or a traumatic brain injury need for supervision.
I think that's what Kara was referring to when you said you had 3 doctors that said they needed somebody with them.
Correct.
But that didn't count.
Yes, they're not even asked for. They're not required to be asked for their input. Only the PCM is required to be asked for his input. And then, like I said, those questions are very generic. Why wouldn't you ask the specialists for their input? What is the purpose of not allowing them to weigh in? Our organization, in working with appeals, has taken those areas of supervision, protection, and instruction and actually asked the specialists to weigh in on those. And in some cases, we've actually received notes back that says they're not allowed to answer those questions because it would give too much information on the needs of the veteran. Well, isn't that the entire purpose of this evaluation, is to inform the decision-making body about the needs of the veteran? The other thing that I think misses the mark is in the development of these assessments and in their administration. These are 90-minute to 120-minute assessments, where the veteran has to sit and list on multiple occasions all of the things he or she can no longer do. And then he has to sit there while the caregiver then recounts everything the veteran cannot do for himself or herself and everything that they then have to do as a result, either to provide the veteran or assistance or just do because the veteran is no longer able to do that. What we hear repeatedly is that takes an emotional toll. For some of these folks who have very severe brain injuries, sometimes they forget that they have these deficits. We've been told for the last several years, build up your veteran, focus on their independence, and then we have an exam that does nothing but tears them down. And as soon as you get them built back up, it's time for a quarterly assessment that goes over the same thing. And so there is really no program no other disability program that you qualify for that you have to re-qualify for or have a check-in on such a frequent basis. And we're wondering why VA does that. And then we hear VA say that there's a lot of wraparound VA mental health services, but I don't see that in practice. And I especially don't see anyone checking in after these reassessments when basically the home is in mental and emotional tatters. I mean, what we hear about this assessment is takes weeks to get people back to their standard. And even with the quarterly assessments, I mean, I can tell you from my own household, after a quarterly assessment, like it would take 2 to 3 days to get him to be able to say, gosh, I feel like I'm worthless. And so I think they attempted to expand the areas that they were looking at, but I don't think that they have, that it's been implemented as they intended for it to be implemented.
Okay. Well, my time is out, but I really appreciate all the work all you're doing, and your testimony really means a lot to all of us. Thank you.
Senator Bozeman.
Well, thank you all for being here, and you really are making a big difference. This is a mess, and I know that we're all committed to helping get it straightened out. I really, we say these things all the time, but the answers need to come from the ground up, okay? And you all are certainly on the front lines and doing a tremendous job, and we really do appreciate that. And like I say, you're making a difference. So, Steve, we can agree on the transparency thing, What else do we agree on that we need to, what other changes? I mean, these real life, all of the, why we don't have the specialist involved and this and that. I mean, none of that makes any sense. Where do we start? You mentioned that we're going to have a summit. Who needs to be at the summit?
Senator Boozman, thank you for that question. I think we need to start over. I think that VA, Congress, the major stakeholder groups need to be put in a room for as many days as it takes us to bring these stories forward, to bring these experiences forward, to bring the advocacy and the regulatory experience that the VSOs and MSOs have alongside our friends and partners at the VA. I will say, Senator, you know, there are good folks. These are good folks at the VA who wanna get this right. But to Sarah's point, in her testimony, we've now paused the program 3 or 4 times, and we've made temporary solutions. It's time to go back to the fundamentals and redraw the lines.
Right. Very good. Anybody else comment on again, like I say, you've given us a lot of really good information, and it's just it's something we're going to have to figure out, Mr. Chairman, and you're going to have a lot of support in doing it. But it is going to be something that we're going to have to, you know, one of the things that Congress doesn't do a very good job of, we've been so blessed, you know, in the sense that for the last several years, we've been able to do a lot for veterans. And that's our veteran service organizations, that's you all pressing things forward. Sometimes we don't do as good a job on the oversight as and that's nobody's fault. I mean, it's our fault, you know, in the sense that we've got to do a better job. But this is one of the things I think we're all committed to rolling up our sleeves and getting the stakeholders involved, getting you all involved, and see how we can come up with some policies that are, you know, user-friendly. And as you point out, Steve, these aren't bad people. These are people that are trying to do the right thing. They're handicapped by the bureaucracy, and sometimes you're not able to even use good common sense. So thank you all for being here. We do appreciate it, and I know it's hard to talk about these things, but you've done a tremendous job expressing the problems you go through and your loved ones. So that's really what it's all about. Thank you.
Senator Brown.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And, thank you all for your testimony and the pain you've gone through and the advocacy that you do for others, including your loved ones, but people you don't know too. Before talking about specifically Air Commission, I want to just raise concerns, and I will do this. I'm doing this personally with the Secretary, but want to raise concerns about his recommendation to the Air Commission to close down the Chillicothe. It's a Veterans Hospital Center south of Columbus and serving Appalachia, and the plans that VA's announced to close it down. It's a long process. We'll have other opportunities to weigh in, but I know already veterans are scared. The hundreds of workers there are scared. It's in Appalachia. It's a poor part of Ohio. They will have to drive to some will drive to West Virginia, some will drive to Dayton, some will drive to Cincinnati. They're long drives to get the kind of care that they're used to getting. And so I wanted to put that just for my colleagues would hear that about Chillicothe. I know that Senator Tester in his state has a lot of those same concerns. I want to concur with what Senator Murray said. I thought she said it really well, as you all did, about the Caregivers Program, that we didn't intend to change how VA decided who would be let into the program or have people removed. We voted, we wanted to expand it. I had a roundtable with caregivers, and hearing the same kinds of stories you told, I know that Senator Bozeman, Moran, and Tester have had the same kinds of discussions. My staff's reached out to a number of caregivers too, and heard directly about what happens if they're kicked off the Caregiver Program in September. They told me without this program, they expect even more veteran suicides. The hopelessness you could see in their eyes, speaking for the person whom they're caring for, their husband, their sister, whoever it is in each case. I applaud the steps VA took this week to ensure those in the program could remain, but it doesn't solve the problem. So I want to start with you, Mr. Schwab, and thanks for what the Dole Foundation is doing. You've been so important in this process. Yesterday, the VA announced, as you know, it convened an external stakeholder event to get input for its new regulation. many of us raised concerns, all of us up here raised concerns, specifically that veterans needed to have a 70% service-connected disability rating or the inability to perform an activity of daily living without assistance. What recommendations would you give to VA, Mr. Schwab, when drafting the new regulations? How many caregivers are going in, and how many caregivers are going through the appeals process that you know of?
Thanks, Senator. That's a great question. On the appeals side, I will tell you that way too many caregivers are so frustrated, and this is a big concern of ours, by the way. Appeals processes exist for a reason, gives folks their right to appeal a decision to our government. In droves, folks are not appealing because they're exhausted, and they feel like...
What Ms. Benson, yeah.
Yeah, they feel like, and I think Andrea's seeing this, I think our friends at DAV are seeing this, we're certainly seeing this at EDF, Independence Fund I know as well. With a 13%, yes rate on appeals, there's a pretty low yield, which discourages appeals altogether. So I think there's a lot of work we have to do around appeals.
So they're exhausted, I'm sorry to interrupt, they're exhausted because they've gone through so much already. They're also not very hopeful that they'll win their appeal.
That's right, Senator.
Okay.
And their exhaustion comes from the arduous evaluative process that you've heard a lot about today.
Okay. So what's your most important recommendation with drafting the new regulations? Oh, you want to, Ms. Benson, yeah.
If that's allowed, thank you. I think some of the exhaustion, these assessments are 6 to 8 hours over 4 assessments. Some of them are in the home. We're exhausted just to get through the process. And for, like my husband, we are dealing with some of the most catastrophically worst of the worst. These are exhausting for them. It can take us weeks and days to get back on track and into a normal rhythm. And they're non-accommodative. We are dealing with veterans with severe disabilities and not able to accommodate those disabilities in assessment. It seems entirely backwards.
Give me an example.
My
Either
husband...
with your husband or somebody else, yeah, sure.
Prime example, my husband has a 30-minute sustained cognitive task limit set by his provision team, by his HBPC team. After 30 minutes of sustained cognitive activity, my husband's brain gets tired. His left side of his face starts to droop. He has trouble with aphasia or finding words. He gets to the point where he can't swallow, and it's all due to exhaustion. Yet, he has to be there for an hour and a half of questioning.
And Senator, if I could just address your really important question, just piggybacking on Kara's compelling comments there. Our biggest concern to get right on the eligibility, on the formula front, is parity between physical and mental and emotional conditions. The President Biden in his State of the Union said we need to call for parity on mental health across this country. That needs to translate down into our agencies. And we're seeing huge disparities between caregivers who are caring for veterans with physical wounds and those that are caring for veterans with invisible wounds. That needs to change.
So, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, if I could do one more quick question on Mr. Schwab, if you would, this is more a request, just because you are so well connected and do this so well, and you know so many people like directly or indirectly, like Ms. Benson's husband, would you sort of collect for the committee I assume you're doing this, what recommendations you would give to the VA?
Yes.
Because we're all of us we're all singing off the same page here, and we all want to fix this. We've all talked to caregivers who are struggling in the hardest times in their lives, forgetting even the pandemic, but struggling in the hardest times of their lives, and we need to know specifically how we guide them to do the right thing.
We're happy to do that, Senator Brown. We work really closely with DAV and Quality of Life and the Independence Fund, Wounded Warrior Project. We'll work together on that. We'll bring that back to the committee.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Sarah, are you still online?
Yes, sir, I am. Hello.
Well, I didn't want to leave you out of this. I will tell you, all your testimony was, by the way, outstanding. Sarah, you did something that normally would make somebody like me angry, but I think it absolutely was the right thing to do, and that is you put it on me as much as you put it on the VA. You put it on this committee and Congress as much as you put it on the VA. And I want to thank you for that. Because the truth is, this is everybody's problem that we need to work together to solve. And if we don't do it this way, it won't get solved. You heard the previous panel, I assume. If you didn't, this is an unfair, it's not either. You can answer this question. They talked about the process they were going through. The timeline was not definite at this moment in time. So I get to ask you, if we were gonna have a timeline for this to fix this program, what do you think a reasonable timeline would be?
Thank you so much, and for your support, and I know your advocacy for veterans and caregivers across the country. This program needs to be fixed immediately. We are all, what Steve just said about people are not appealing because they're exhausted. I was here silently saying, yes, agree, cosign, because I am an advocate and I'm used to being an advocate. When my husband just got dropped a level, my first thought was, I don't have the fight in me anymore. I just can't do it. I have been fighting to keep him alive going forward and to advocate for more than a decade. At the fight, they won, VA won. And this needs to be fixed immediately from a morale standpoint for the veterans and caregivers that are in this program and relying on it. And also, as everyone has said today, what we go through in our households with the veterans for whom we provide care, our loved ones, after these assessments, during the assessments, it is dehumanizing, it is demoralizing, it is embarrassing. My husband, and for a long time, I didn't want to say this part out loud, and now I have widely shared this, but my husband does not control bowel or bladder function. My husband had his arm and leg blown off. He's burned over more than 30% of his body. He's had 120 surgeries. Many of you have been so amazing to us in this 10-year plus long journey. And VA is forcing us to relive why he can't. Now he's on catheter care, bowel and bladder care through VA. He's on home-based oxygen program. I keep 100% of his care at the VA because I believe in the VA system and having a cohesive system where the right and left hand speak to each other. But clearly that's not happening as we're going through these assessments. And this is true for thousands of caregivers. I've outlined 15 in my written testimony. As we are going through this process and having to relive all these things, and then in front of my husband, I'm having to explain, well, yes, he does have a shower chair, but no, his bottom is actually very burnt. And because, of all the bladder issues, he has a recurring diaper rash, but oh, sir, examiner, could you please check his VA medical files that actually detail all of this so that at 37 years old, my husband is sitting next to me hearing about this. And so that's why I'm here begging you to help fight for all of us, because we've been fighting for each other and for our veterans for a long time, and we are exhausted. So I hope that right now, immediately, in fact, we're going to hear news that we're going to reverse the poor decisions. We're going to ensure national consistency. And I already feel encouraged knowing that you all are taking this issue and continuing to look at it so seriously, as all of our partner organizations are that are there today. So thank you.
Thank you. Senator Sinema.
Thank you, Chairman Tester. I want to thank our panelists for being here and for the service that your organizations do for America's veterans. I know some of you, like us, are still reviewing the VA's announcement yesterday that they're halting discharge of legacy participants in the Family Caregivers Program. I'm encouraged to see that the VA is changing course after feedback from veterans, caregivers, and members of Congress. For over a decade, the Caregivers Program has been a critical lifeline for those seriously wounded in the global war on terror. The Caregivers Program was designed to support veterans and does so by providing flexibility to their loved ones who provide hours of daily care. For many of the Arizonans I hear from, caregiving has become a full-time job, a job that, despite the VA's announcement yesterday, now feels like it has little job security. So my first question is for any on the panel who'd like to answer. My office has been hearing from Arizona veterans and caregivers with concerns about how they'll get by if they're removed from the program. So what can we do to ease this transition if caregivers are removed from the program in the future and need to re-enter the workforce? Mr.
Senator,
Schwab.
thanks for that question. It's an important one. And thanks for your support of your Arizona caregivers. We know that you're a big advocate for those families. I'll say the first thing we ought to do when we relook at the program and start over, which we're all discussing is necessary, is we've got to move VA towards a warm handoff. If someone is decreased in services or dropped from a program, they need to be walked through what other services and supports are available for them right now at VA. And beyond VA, a lot of our organizations provide support that fills in the gap for these families when they're not eligible for a certain program. And many of us have been challenged and struggle to work with VA to help them facilitate a warm handoff to our organization so that we can step in and provide community support to the great families in Arizona and elsewhere. So I think those two things are really, really important when we all come together and talk about where the program goes, and I'm sure my colleagues have other thoughts.
Hi, Senator. So when we get a family that's received a denial, before we start the clinical appeal, one of the first things we do is to have them reach out to their PCM for a referral to HHA and, if necessary, to skilled nursing also. Because one of those things, by doing that, we actually document the care need that VA says the veteran, that by dismissing the family from the program, we are actually documenting the need that the veteran actually does need that care according to the according to another VA program. And by doing that, we started the process of getting a support in place for a caregiver to begin looking for work, whether or not they choose to appeal or whether or not they choose to accept those services and move back into the workplace. We then talk about, you know, if those services are offered, then you need to start taking advantage of those services. Even if what you're doing it for, if it falls outside of the respite hours, you need to start using those hours that as a caregiver, you should not do the VA's job for free. Because what we feel like VA is relying upon caregivers to do is that they're going to take the caregiving supports away from caregivers, and yet no caregiver will leave their post of caregiving. So basically the VA is getting us to do our job for free. I was an original 2009 caregiver that was put on the Hill by an organization to come and advocate for the original legislation. And what Congress, what many of the members that we met with said that they wanted to do was to help support us so we could stay home, which meant that we gave up our jobs and our skills, we gave up our retirement, we gave up our contributions to Social Security, because as a caregiver, if there is no earned income in the home, you cannot contribute to Social Security. And the safeguard was that we would have this stipend with which we could have at least a little spending money that was our money for us to figure out what to do with. Basically, we feel like we've been in a reversal. So we're having to tell caregivers to find job training that, by the way, since you're still receiving your caregiver pay, you need to be able to do in the home while you're still doing this, while you're still receiving the caregiver stipend, but have it completed so you can return to work when the caregiver stipend runs out, and go ahead and get your supports in place so that when the day you do need to return to work, they're already set up.
Mr. Chairman, I know my time's expired. Are there others who wanted to respond, and might I have?
Thank you, Senator. I think they put it elegantly that, you know, the warm handoff is so important because there are other resources out there that are available to folks. So if they're getting, you know, disenrolled from the program, that they're aware of those and they're able to seek those out very easily, and that we're able to connect them with them very easily.
Thanks. Mr. Chairman, if I might, just thank you. The Caregivers Program is supposed to include financial planning services, and I wanted to ask about the effectiveness of the benefit. Are caregivers and their veterans prepared financially for the long term, including major changes to the program? And Ms. Benson, if you have anything from a personal experience to share, I'd love to hear that.
Thank you, Senator. That is a far more recent addition. In the VISN we are in, to my knowledge, they don't have that support in place yet. We're asked if we would like a referral. That is something that many of us don't step into. I know there are several with fiduciaries who already have some planning in place. For me, especially when I advocate with other caregivers, I talk a lot about making sure you have a secondary plan in place. If you have Chapter 35 benefits, make sure you use them before they expire. Talking about something as simple as health insurance and making sure that you understand the process for DIC and that it takes a while. All of those things are things we talk about in caregiver advocacy, but I have not heard personally that anyone is hearing that from VA or the VISN I'm in.
Has anyone else heard? Ms. Sawyer?
I haven't actually heard whether or not those programs are functional as of yet, but in bringing that up with health insurance, one of my concerns about the changes in this program and the drops that we have is this program provides health insurance for some of our caregivers, and one of the concerns that I have is how are we transitioning these caregivers who are going to be removed from the program and rely on this program for their health insurance? How are we transitioning them to health insurance in other ways?
Ms. Sawyer, if I might, that was actually my last question.
Oh, okay.
So my question for all of you is, what, if anything, should Congress do to help caregivers who have relied on the program for so long and may need to provide for their own health care insurance if they are disenrolled?
Senator, I think that's one of the most important questions that hasn't been asked yet. And your colleague, Senator Brown, asked if the Elizabeth Dole Foundation would work with our partners to come up with some solutions to recast the program. I think at the same time, we need to come back to the committee with some recommendations for support for families that aren't eligible. To your question, Senator, and I think that's some work that we can do together as organizations and report back to the committee because it's an essential question.
Mr. Chairman, if I might, I'd like to request that we ask for that information back and get it as quickly as possible to figure out what, if anything, can Congress do? What action can we take to help people prepare for the fact that they may be disenrolled and losing their health insurance?
Absolutely. We'll get that information, and then we will also distribute it not only to everybody on this committee, but back to the VA. I think that's part of the process conversation that that we've had, and that is that in the end we have the oversight responsibility. But the bottom line is the VA needs to step up. And so any recommendations we appreciate so we can take a look and see if implementable, how quickly we can get them done. So,
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Look, we have a lot of work to do. It's pretty obvious by the testimony here today. I've been on this committee for 15 years, and I don't know that we've ever had a committee hearing that's as gut-wrenching as this hearing is. As Ranking Member Moran and I were talking, we passed a caregivers component that we thought was going to make it better, and obviously it's made it worse. That wasn't congressional intent, but it's pretty obvious what's transpired here. And I think it's really important that we continue with more oversight than we've begun this program in the past, and make sure that the changes that the administration makes actually benefit the veterans, because that was the congressional intent from the beginning. It wasn't to make it more bureaucratic. It wasn't to kick people off the program. It wasn't to put veterans through hell in assessments. It was about making sure that we were doing right by the people who served our country and gave a lot to this country with their service to this country. And so I look forward to continuing to work with the folks that are here today and the other VSOs out there that are listening, and the other veterans that are out there listening, and the caregivers that are out there listening, to make sure that we make the right improvements to this program so it serves our veterans in a way that I think Congress intended for it to be all along. Once again, I want to express my appreciation for the witnesses for being here today. I want to express my appreciation for the folks from the VA, Dr. Kate Taylor, Dr. Richardson, for you staying and listening, because I think it's very, very important that we really roll up our sleeves and we don't take a long time doing this. We gather the information as much as we can, and I think it's out there, and go to work and solve the problem in a timely manner. With that, we will keep the record open for a week, and this hearing is adjourned.